Just up front that this is part two of a two-part episode on evil. So if you haven't listened to that, you should go back and do that. This is The Devil You Don't Know, and it's the podcast that explores the historical and cultural relevance of the figure known as the devil. I'm Don Early, and my co-hosts are Emily Kwan and Jeremy Spray. Let's cue the music. The origins of evil, where does evil come from? And I think right out of the gate, we need to, many people out there believe that there is no evil, that evil does not actually even exist. Wow. I found a really interesting article in Slate magazine published called Does Evil Exist? Neuroscientists Say No. And they cite a British professor of psychopathology, Simon Baron Cohen. Yeah, it is the cousin of Sacha Baron Cohen.
Nice.
Like
all right, cool.
That name sounds...
It's wild that they have the same middle name. Like that's crazy.
Well, I think that's their last name. It's hyphenated.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah. But they cite him saying as replacing the word evil with the concept of lack of empathy. Instead of saying someone is evil, you say they lack empathy. And there are spectrums of levels of empathy or the lack thereof that we have associated with evil along the way. And then there's many religious or anti-religious arguments for the lack of evil, which we'll get to in a bit. But so there is this point that some out there say it's made up. It doesn't actually exist.
Okay, is it made up? Yes, because I believe it's a human construct. Does it not actually exist? I feel like there's a lot of evidence that says otherwise.
Yeah.
That's a real interesting kind of, dare I say, head in the sand approach to not wanting to accept the realities of the atrocities that people can cause to each other.
It sounds to me that it's just swapping words.
Like the nomenclature, like they call it something else. What I would refer to as evil, they call a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, to me, right. That's my very surface scratching kind of thing. To get into what Russell is saying, Jeffrey Burton Russell, I think is exactly on point of what you are going on about here. Is evil comes from humanity and humanity's perceptions. Mm-hmm. And it is, I agree with this too. Evil is a universal human experience throughout all time and all locations. Cultures all over the place develop similar concepts and similar even models of evil and the devil. And they can do this completely independent of each other because it is so universal. But we have to ask why that is. And it's because we perceive it this way, that we experience the cosmos as sometimes benign and sometimes hostile, and human nature just seems to want to divide against itself. So evil is deeply rooted in the human consciousness. Just it's kind of embedded in, for whatever reason. I mean, we can get into nature, genetics, nurture, society, but the fact of the matter is, it does seem to be quite universal, no matter where you're at.
Yeah, it exists, and I wouldn't say that it's just a lack of empathy. I don't know.
I mean, maybe it can be part of that. I think.
I would say equation. For sure that's part of it, but I don't think that you can set that definition to evil. I that's not encompassing enough.
So evil can spread when we make it abstract. that it kind of like a malignancy. I feel like it can metastasize when we start assigning evil in an abstract way, assigning it to supernatural or numbers. The farther away we get from the individual suffering, the less perceived and the less comprehended evil we get.
I mean, I would agree with that, back on the same terms that we had of the when it's a very grand scale and it's not emotionally felt in person, then you don't experience it in the same way. And if you don't experience it, it can keep going, right? If there's an evil act of like, oh no, 100,000 people, that's terrible. Oh no, now it's 200,000 people, right? Like it keeps growing, it keeps spreading, but I'm not really relating to it. And so we're all just kind of like, oh, that sounds awful. When you're like, oh no, that person, and then that family, and then that family, like that, you want to put a stop to that. You feel like that's something you want to take action against and prevent that from continuing.
Right. And examples of evil to the abstract would be religious doctrine. So the doctrines of sin, heresy, perceived as consorting with the devil or other evil forces, the notion of original sin, it separates things, and it tends to group everything together into something that's unrecognizable. We can feel the fear, but we don't. We lose the connection to empathy.
Yeah.
And greater evils come out of that, as we've seen with crusades and all kinds of awful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another example might be political or economic ideology. So democracy, communism, capitalism, these ideals have led to concentration camps. And, we think about immigration policy. That's a political or economic ideology led to border child detention camps here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Also Japanese internment camps. It just, when we make it abstract, and we lose the empathy, we lose that connection.
I agree with that.
Okay, moving on. Evil is also something done by me, self-inclusion, right? So there is intentional evil. We all have feelings that life, left unchecked, could develop into malicious action. For example, it's easy for us, and this isn't true for everybody, but it's kind of easy for us to delight in the suffering of one who causes suffering. We see that a lot in movies. When we see someone who has done pure evil and evil is done to them, we feel a sense of satisfaction.
Oh, so much satisfaction.
The Schadenfreude effect.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is in itself evil.
Oh, man.
Just called you out.
Oh.
Yeah. So feeling compelled to do harm to those who do intentionally harm. What does
that? Hang on a second.
What if I'm not the one doing harm to people who are doing harm? What if I'm just enjoying that harm is coming to them because they're crappy people? and that's still evil. Tell me no. Come on.
See, what I feel is what would I call this? Righteous anger.
Yes.
Suddenly, I have this justification. I just mentioned fuck Nazis. I had a phrase that I used in Twitter for a full year and a half, punch Nazis, hashtag punch a Nazi. And that was my emotional reaction. It was the way I was responding to things, punch Nazis. And I now heard you just say that my willingness to cause harm to another person because of their belief in symbols means that I was being evil. And
it was an evil action.
an evil action or even an evil thought because I'm causing harm to somebody else.
Yeah.
And now my justified anger doesn't feel as justified because I was being evil to them. So fuck you. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, if we're going back to this understanding that evil is the intentional causing of suffering.
Yeah.
Right?
But even causing suffering to those who are evil is still in itself not the opposite of evil. It's still it's an evil act as well.
Yeah.
Causing suffering. Damn it.
Yeah, Don, come on. What if they deserve it?
But I'm the good guy.
Right?
How do my head.
How do we define what's deserving and what isn't? You know, now we're getting into moral philosophy. Which I'm not going to spend much more time.
Oh my gosh.
All right. Okay. So intentional. What are do you have any other thoughts? Like I gave you that example. Are there any other examples of intentional evil? It's not extreme like killing a dog on purpose, but what are some examples now that I've given that example of the, delighting in somebody else's suffering? Is there anything that comes to mind that is like that?
You mean present day or in our lives, or what's your context you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of, fishing for intentional evil done by ourselves. What could we confess, if you want to go that route, is an intentional evil? Where do you cause suffering?
Well, if you ask my children, I cause them suffering when I tell them that it's time for them to brush their teeth.
Yeah.
So there's that.
What about the cause of the suffering of your own self?
Oh boy.
Sure. Okay.
Doing evil to your own self.
Yeah. No, great example is I gained not a ton of weight over COVID, but I gained weight. So I will look at myself in the mirror and I'll judge that. Mm-hmm. And I'll be like, you don't look like you did when you were 25. And how dare you? Mm-hmm. Right? What did you do to yourself? That's an emotional harm, but it's certainly not uplifting, and it's not acting as good. So I would say that is a self-evil action, even if it's just a mild or even a major self-deprecation. That could, I don't feel directly like the emotional reaction I have to it is not I'm being evil. So I don't have that same kind of connection to it, but on the general terms, I'd say that's when I could pull out.
I think it's important to distinguish being evil versus doing evil, being evil versus experiencing evil. Okay. Because so I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't go so far to say that you are being evil to yourself, but you are doing evil to yourself. I've done that for myself as well throughout the years.
Very self-deprecating to myself.
And once again, if we think of evil back to what we talked about, the causing of suffering intentionally.
Yeah.
There is a level where we do that to ourselves. We cause ourselves to suffer.
I mean, I don't have any examples of where I have like gone out and killed an animal or something.
Right.
But I mean, we can, if you're talking about causing harm to yourself, I mean, we could go down to the very basics of, am I going to drink alcohol, even though I know alcohol is bad for my liver, it's bad for my body? Am I, will I choose to have a glass or two of wine tonight or not? Or, I really know I should eat more salads, but macaroni and cheese is just so much better. So like choosing to maybe not make the best food and drink choices, that does over time cause harm to your body. But again, I don't know that
might fall into the next category.
Am I being evil to myself because I'm doing that? I would say no. But by what you just said, I guess that would mean that I am.
Again, there is no perfect definition of evil and doing evil. We're just kind of comparing things against, this sort of commonalities that we're laying forth, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe over time, the destruction of your own body through the choices that you intentionally made, knowing that it would destroy your own body, maybe that is a form of evil.
And yeah, I've never thought of it this way until you just brought that up. So
hey, I'm
You're just gonna take the fun out of everything, Don.
I'm just reporting stuff I read in a book, okay? All right, so let's move on. There is unintentional evil that we do, done by the self. For instance, living in a first world country, being white, participating in systems that oppress and cause suffering to your neighbor, whether you are doing it directly or not, you are upholding those systems. I am upholding those systems.
We benefit from these systems, and
the very existence of this podcast, the computer that we're all using, buying a smartphone, where did these raw materials come from? Who assembled the parts? Who is suffering in order to bring you your device so that you can have flame wars on Facebook? Not saying you, but like in general, right?
Damn straight in general. Call that flame wars.
Jeremy. You and your flame wars. Right? You can I remember studying this in college. Like you can easily get overwhelmed once you start, wrestling with your own privilege, right? And the evils that just the system and the structure itself causes, that you benefit, you participate in it. And in a lot of ways, you can't not, we don't have a lot of choice in some of that. And sometimes, honestly, we probably do have quite a bit of choice. It's just too uncomfortable to do,
Yeah.
But it's a form of unintentional evil. In church, we always talk about the sins we have done. I forget how it goes, but it's, the sins that we know about, and, forgive us for the sins we know about, and forgive us for the sins that we have done that we don't know about. It's not part of the
trespasses as we forgive those who trespass.
No, it's not the Lord's Prayer. It's part of the liturgy. I can't remember it. But anyway, it's a notion that has been in the consciousness for a while. It's just, I'm pointing it out. Here's an interesting one. And this one has really changed my perspective a bit. And I want to throw this out and see what you guys think. Lying. The essence of evil. C.S. Lewis suggested that C.S. Lewis suggested that the lie is the worst of the sins because it attacks the structure of meaning itself and renders the cosmos unintelligible and unlovable.
Wow.
That's
C.S. Lewis, little extreme there.
Yeah.
I have a real interesting connection with lies. And it's not a connection, it's an interpretation. I feel that is a part of society. Mm-hmm. It's a part of linguistics. It's a part of language, and nearly every society that has it. And there is a natural craving. I believe the body is literally in a healthier state when it is in full honesty. If it's in this absolute candor state. But almost every society that I am aware of has a a lesson that is taught when we're very young that being 100% honest is detrimental, and it threatens your safety. And so we learn to lie as a part of being social creatures. So humanity requires social structure. We need that. And in light of being a part of that, there has to be this barrier that's put into place of lying, even though what we really want to do is be honest constantly. Like when you're, a lot of people, when they lie, they physically get ill. It affects them so much because they're not holding that honesty out there.
And I mean, maybe we can talk about, different degrees of lying too, but the point that has really struck me from this thought. So Martin Buber says a lie is possible only after a creature man was capable of convincing the being of truth. In a lie, the spirit practices treason against itself. And the way that I think that comes back to what Lewis said, and where I'm kind of going with this, is that when there is a lie, a thing that is put out there to be perceived as true or betrayal of the truth, those who believe the lie, their world changes. The cosmos becomes...
They alter their reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I come back to this sort of QAnon thing, right? There's this really ridiculous conspiracy theory that people believe as real, as a thing, and it's informing the decisions that they make. And it's a giant lie that is being put out there that is changing the way people think and changing the way people make decisions and act on those.
Which then affect other people.
Right. So
especially
there's been
people who might not believe those things, but that still is impacting their life as well.
If they perceive that somebody else is a demon or evil or a satanic member of a cabal whose sole design is to cause you or your children harm, some may be motivated to take arms and go take care of that person. And that's happened in the news around, I think, an assassination attempt on a mob boss. Again, I get what you're saying, Jeremy. I think you're right in a way that as we tell stories, and there are certain things that we need to do to get by, right? Yeah. But for me, it's just the acknowledgement that a lie can alter someone's reality for real, which informs them on how they make decisions and act upon them. It's a powerful, powerful thing that exists. Whether it or not a lie in and of itself is evil, it has... Maybe we could amend Lewis's thought is evil. A lie has it's the easiest and greatest potential to become the worst sin.
I can't disagree with that. I think that's the part that I have that I'm struggling with a little bit. And even pulling it back all around, the concept of a lie, that thou shalt not lie, right? That is one of the great 10 commandments. A name for the devil that we've been aware of is the father of lies. Like there is this very clear, very hard line that C.S. Lewis, I think, is just underlining a second time, saying this is an evil act. To not be honest is to go against your nature, right? Life fighting against itself. And it is intentionally causing harm because you know what the truth is and you are speaking an opposite of that. So it's really interesting to really think of it as an evil by all the definitions that we've been talking about, because I think it fits. I think it really does qualify. But I can't help but feel that it is a necessary evil, to actually use that quoted term, to exist in the society that we have today, despite the fact that I feel, as a person who wants to be good, I'm constantly pushing against it. I'm trying to consistently be honest with myself and with others, even though the lies are so prevalent in my language. And in language
okay, so what about this? If we think about a lie or lying in terms of drinking alcohol, drinking, in moderation in and of itself does not really harm you. Your body can process it. It's fine. It can make you feel good. It can elevate your life. It can create happiness and joy. But as that increases, as alcohol increases and the abuse of it increases, or the usage, even though it feels good, starts to hurt. And I'm wondering, maybe lying is kind of like that. I'm wondering, maybe, again, lying in and of itself isn't evil. It is a mechanism that we must use in daily life, one way or the other, to get through. But we're constantly wrestling with those lies and deciding whether or not we need them anymore, and confronting them, or even realizing that something we do believe is a lie.
Right.
And maybe we are okay with that. That's the other thing. Recognizing a lie and going, yep, I'm going to continue with the blue pill,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as the larger the lie, or the greater, it just has such a potential to be so powerfully transformative for the worse.
Yeah.
I think that's why it rose to the top, and why I think it is resounding, it's ringing my bell. But I think that's why it moved C.S. Lewis the way it did.
Yeah.
I think he's too quick to just call it out absolutely evil, but he's putting that in the context, I think you're right, of like the 10 Commandments and that sort of thing. So, okay. So we're still talking about, where does evil come from? For many cultures, evil comes from evil spirits and other supernatural beings that are evil. This is very prevalent in African religions, where a lot of evil originates from evil spirits or bad spirits causing, you to do bad things, or evil becomes its own thing after it's been done, after it's been introduced. What I've read is evil can come from the supernatural, and that's where it originates from. And that's why humanity does evil things, is because it's from these evil spirits. Or a man is bad, a person is bad, they do bad things, and there it spirals out of control from there. In Iran, pre-Islam, there is the Zoroastrianism religion that gets founded, and we have this character who is really the first devil. And I'm excited to really get into him in a future episode, which I will. But his name is Ahura Mainyu, or later on he's referred to as Ahriman, and his creations are the source of all evil. He is the Prince of Darkness. He is the literal Prince of Darkness. And all of evil emanates and comes from him. And so we have that. And then we also have God. Many societies develop a concept of a single divine principle God, or there's only one.
Sure.
And they are, at the very least, responsible for both good and evil. In polytheistic religions, each god in the pantheon is also characterized this way, having a dual nature. And they're often paired up with maybe another god, so that they're in opposites of each other. But in those, they're not specifically one or the other, right? In Hinduism, Brahma is called the creation and destruction of all people. The gods and demons both lied and told the truth. In Greek, Roman, Egyptian, we still have the one God expressed in the many gods, and they all have this kind of other thing. But then we have Christianity, which is monotheistic. The devil pulls humanity away from God. And then we have, God and devil sit at opposite ends of the spectrum, representing their absolutes, and all the different Christian religions and Christian-based type religions that spawn off from that mythology. They all have different beliefs on how that exactly works. And we're just saying that there can be a lot of supernatural origins of evil.
Sure. Yeah.
And then finally on this subject is that there can be a natural evil in addition to a moral evil. Now, again, I'm putting this out there as something that Jeffrey Burton Russell is positing or saying, and a lot of scholars are backing him up on this. Natural evil can be described as destructive acts of God or of nature, like tornadoes, hurricanes, cancer. And so God is an intelligent being causing the suffering to sentient beings, right?
Sure, yeah.
By causing these natural disasters.
Acts of God, yeah.
Okay, yep.
I mean, how long have we interpreted, this beam fell on me, I must be being punished for something I did, or the crops are not going to grow because I didn't turn backwards 5 times or something. So Hinduism says that evil is just a part of the natural order of things. It's a part of life. It's the part of the cycle of participating in karma. It's just intrinsic. So that would be kind of a nature thing. You just can't, it's like, oxygen is part of the air. It's just an element. Yeah. But moral evil, we've talked a lot about already, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but it just comes from the will of a person or other intelligent being, such as a god. It emanates from them. Like we said, it comes from people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But from a God standpoint, from particularly an Abrahamic or Judeo-Christian thought, I just want to bring this out of, you don't think God in biblical God is not evil or doesn't do evil? I ask the question, is the murder of innocent babies evil? Like intentional murder of babies evil?
Yes. Yeah, we call that evil.
Yeah.
And so we have a very famous story where God orders the divine murder of all of the firstborn male babies in Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And you get passed over by killing a lamb instead.
Yeah.
And putting the blood above your door to mark that you heard the command. So there's a lot of, and like that's one example. That's the one where he did that one. You can go straight into Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
Right after that, you could go to straight all the way to Abraham and the request for Isaac to be killed. Then you have Job. Like there's examples all over the place of God doing evil acts or allowing evil acts to happen.
Yeah.
Sure.
But yet for centuries we've been arguing that God has to be good and God can't do evil. And we're going to get into that after the break. So, yeah, I think that's it for now. I think we've covered quite a bit. We're going to come back here in a second, and we're going to talk about the cause of evil and then wrap things up. Okay, so in an attempt to explain why there is evil, we have for centuries invented theodicies. Or more recently, we turned to psychology.
And you said theodicies, not just the Odysseys?
Correct.
Okay.
Theodicies. So what a theodicy is it's an attempt to answer the questions, why does God do evil in the world? Or why does it, God cause evil to happen or allow it to happen? Any attempt at justifying the God's ways in the world is a theodicy. So that's just a term that I'm kind of throwing out there, but That's all it is. It's an attempt to explain why things are the way they are, particularly around evil, and God. Gotcha. So theodicies are expressed in theology or mythology, and they are monistic or dualistic. And I will explain what all of that means. So
Good.
Theology, we'll start with theology. Theology is rational terms, explaining things in an intellectual and experiential way, and basically all of religious doctrines is what this is. I mean, it's all theodicies trying to explain, trying to grasp the relationship between the man and the divine, nature, and an attempt to explain why there is evil and we have a God that is good. And all religions have, some way of trying to justify this. And in Christianity, we hear a lot about God works in mysterious ways. God has a plan. Everything happens for a reason. Those aren't completely accepted by all Christian faiths, but it's a thing that we hear.
Yeah.
And those are examples of a theological theodicy. We have mythological theodicies as well. And so this is storytelling. Mythology in a sense that it's not a false thing. I don't mean that, but rather a story that tells truth. Robert Woods calls mythology, although myths are not literally or scientifically true at face value, they express a more profound truth at a deeper level of human consciousness. Myths are important because they reflect what's going on in our consciousness at the time, and that helps us understand a certain people at a certain time. And
storytelling is the oldest form of trying to decipher the world.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that makes sense, right? We use stories to explain why there is evil, why this happens.
Yeah.
Monism and dualism. So monism is different than monotheism. Monism means that there is only one divine entity at all. But monism can have monotheism or polytheism. I'll explain monotheistic makes sense. There's one God, that's it.
Sure.
We get that. So that's the Abrahamic religions and so on. But the polytheistic religions, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Norse, there is really only one Hindu. There is really only one divine entity that exists in the universe. But we have different gods that are expressions of this divine principle, this divine being. So they're expressed in different gods, but there's still only one. So we have that, Christianity has this in the form of the Trinity. There's one God, but there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Very similar. Just take that and make them gods and pantheons, but there's one entity. So that's monism.
Makes sense.
Dualism is that there's two. There's two entities. One is good and one is responsible for evil. And this came about as a revolutionary concept that occurred in Iran just before 600 BCE with the teachings of the prophet named Zarathustra. And he laid the basis for the first thoroughly dualistic religion with his revelation that evil is not a manifestation of the God, of the high God. Rather, there is another God. There's another divine principle. And so the high God is no longer responsible for evil. It's this other guy's
It's the
job.
other one.
Yeah.
Man, I would have loved to see the reaction to that.
It was huge.
The first time they've ever heard of a second God, like that would just be explosive.
Yeah.
Whether people completely bought into it, they're like, oh, thank the one God. There's two of you. I understand what's happening. Or the absolute rejection of like, this is not how I was raised. Like that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Well, also, I think that's easier too. If there's now two entities, that means that your God can be
all benevolent
all good.
And good.
Yeah.
And
you don't have to struggle with the thought of, what if God causes not just good, but also the stuff we don't like.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty obvious that people have been very uncomfortable with the notion that God is responsible for evil. I mean, this comes out in monistic theodicies that basically try and disprove the existence of God using logical argument. God exists, and if so, he is omniscient, omnipotent, and morally perfect. So if he is omnipotent, he has the power to eliminate all evil. If he's omniscient, he knows when evil is going to exist. If God is morally perfect, then God has the desire to eliminate all evil, but evil exists. And if evil exists and God exists, then either God doesn't have the power to eliminate the evil, or doesn't know when the evil is going to happen, or doesn't have the desire to do it, and therefore God doesn't exist. So that's a reductionist argument. And there's various forms of that. But so remember when I said that there are some religious people who think that evil doesn't exist? Well, just take that argument and put it in reverse.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If God exists, evil can't exist. And the final note on this is that a lot of this, the common theme is free will. So the common theme in theodicies across religion is that evil is caused by the free will choice of someone. They chose to do it. Again, we talked about, intentionality, but in mythology, we see not only does this happen in humanity, but also the gods themselves. They can cause evil, and they do this through free will. And Lucifer, we have the story, that there was an angel. He, by his own choice, his free will, he fell out of grace and was ousted from heaven.
Yeah.
And that was because he had the free will to do it. So that's theodicy. This last bit is, I mentioned psychology. So there's all this theodicy stuff, but then there's psychology. So to explain why does evil happen, we have the nature versus nurture argument. So it's genetic, comes from our animalistic nature, born out of eons of struggle to survive in a hostile and indifferent environment. Genetic, or it can be, from a moral standpoint, original sin, from a doctrine standpoint. But this kind of falls apart when you get to evil that is beyond self-defense of life or territory. When we get into evils that are on these, that don't fall into that.
Gigantic
you mentioned
scales.
killing to survive. Yeah. It's like that.
Yeah. The other argument, of course, is society produces evil. That's the nurture. So your environment, your family, social structures. But this also falls apart because the values of the society, of each society, are shaped by its leaders. And those leaders are different in different societies. So there's not a consistency in that.
Yeah. Nazis versus Germans today.
Right.
Easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we see that nature versus nurture doesn't really hold up in psychological argument. Then we have humanistic psychology, and this comes down to evil happens because of the consciousness and unconsciousness. And we're talking about Jung and Freud and Frankl. Ultimately, what we think and experience and feel is the only thing we really know. So there's a couple of things that happen with consciousness and unconsciousness. We have repression versus conscious suppression. I'm going to throw these terms out, but try and stay with me here.
Okay.
I'll give you the example. I anger you and you want to hit me in the face. Conscious suppression is the recognition of this urge and then intentionally making the choice not to act upon it.
Intentionally not punching you in the face.
Yes. You recognize it and you are choosing not to do that. Unconscious repression is refusing to even recognize the urge, maybe thinking you are too nice of a person that you would never even do such a thing. And so you bury it. And so that's repression.
Is that even an urge? If you don't recognize that you have it?
So what they're saying is repression of these destructive feelings creates a shadow that builds up within you in your unconsciousness, and it can burst out with in a destructive way without warning. So the more we repress, the blacker and the denser this shadow becomes. And
then it's like a dam bursting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to answer your question, yeah, it is not refusing it because it's your unconscious mind dealing with it. There's no way for you to know.
Okay.
But depth psychology lends kind of an interesting take on this. So this is Carl Jung, and it suggests that evil happens because it's how the human mind develops, and it lends itself to personify things. So in the beginning, a person has a chaotic and undifferentiated view of themselves. Take any toddler.
Say any child.
Yeah. Interview a 3-year-old about anything, and it's all over the board. They, what's right, what's wrong, what's evil, who are they? It's all over the place. As they develop, good and evil sides are gradually differentiated from each other. He says that we have a tendency to repress the evil side, causing growth of a shadow in our unconsciousness. And then if repression mechanisms are too strong, the shadow may become monstrous and burst out. The third stage is what he calls integration, and he thinks this is what healthy people do. Good and evil are recognized and then reintegrated on a conscious level, on that intentional level. They go, okay, I know what this is. Now I'm going to choose to put these things together and own that. And he posits this as a very interesting way to look at religion. So at first, God may appear undifferentiated, good and evil, Sodom and Gomorrah, angel of death, all that. But as the religion develops, a benevolent Lord and an evil devil surface and are increasingly separated, and the evil devil is repressed and banished. Revelation, triumph over the devil.
Getting rid of the guy on the left shoulder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listening to the right shoulder, right? Angel and demon.
The third stage, though, doesn't really seem to exist in history of the world, which would be the reintegration or the integration of the Lord and the devil together. I mean, we've seen comical movies about that, but, So let's take a quick break and we'll wrap up. Okay, so final thoughts on this episode on evil. Are we any closer to a definition we can all kind of work with here? I feel like we've talked about... So my thoughts are, I'm still going to come forward with the notion that evil is a universal experience. It's a universal thing that humanity has always experienced from the, from the get-go. But evil is as we perceive it to be, as humanity has always perceived it to be. And that has been, in my opinion, very clearly different in different religions and societies. They have perceived different things to be evil.
Right.
But there is still evil. They perceive evil, and that is the constant.
Yeah.
And so I think the thing that is consistent is that there is a concept of evil throughout history that is universal. There is a concept that people create. Now, the concept itself may differ significantly, but there is a concept. And then to talk about the history of evil and come to some kind of definition, I would say what Jeffrey Burton Russell kind of puts forth is that evil, the history of evil, is the history of its concept.
So you mean just the idea that evil exists indicates that evil exists?
That's a very I think therefore I am type of thing.
Well, you're going to hear that a lot with me, but
okay.
But what I mean is the history of evil. Maybe I'm talking about two different things here too. So the history of evil, or trying to nail down what is evil throughout time, or the understandings, is really the history of the concepts of evil. So, evil is a thing we all experience, but our concepts in each different culture and each different time can vary based on values and external circumstances or whatever it might be.
Sure.
Okay.
That's kind of really what I'm getting at. It's real. I kind of feel like it's academic or technical, but I don't know how we can really. They're not necessarily universal elements throughout all of it, but there's some commonalities, right? So as I said, evil is a universal human experience. We associate evil with things that we perceive and experience. And we've kind of, the three of us have talked a lot about evil being connected with the intentional cause of suffering or harm, the intentional, with intentionality of a
to another being,
to abuse of a living being, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I also, not just that, but I think it's having to derive some type of pleasure or satisfaction from causing that harm to another being. There are times when you're forced to harm something in the moment in order to save it. I don't know.
I think I know what you mean.
Right. So the intention has to be bad to cause harm to another being. And I want to say that there has to be some type of pleasure derived from doing it.
There's a lot of it gets sort of embedded in the ancient concept of hubris and pride, sort of baked in, entitlements can sort of spur one to these things. We talked a lot about suppression and repression and conscious suppression.
Right.
So the intentional choice to not do it, and there's free will. So it's not a thing that you're made to do evil. You choose to do evil because it's your choice. And that has been a common theme among different concepts of evil, is that free will is, there.
Sure.
It's needed. I'm still going to posit that you can do evil to yourself. I'm still going to throw that out. I know that we've had a little bit of back and forth or wishy-washy on that, but I'm going to put my foot down on that one, but I don't think it's enough to say that it is a necessary thing that we adopt for the definition or how we're going to understand evil. I just think it's a thing that you could probably do to yourself.
But if the definition, though, of evil that we threw out is intentionally causing harm to another being, other being denotes not you.
But I mean, if you back it up and remove the other, intentionally causing harm to a living being, then to the example that you were just talking about, Emily, I was thinking about a bus is driving, right? You're on the edge of the street, and yanking someone out of the street and causing them harm, hurting their arm to pull them away from the danger of the bus, right? You cause them harm, but that's not an evil act. You were saving them.
Exactly.
As opposed to pushing them in front of the bus, right?
Exactly.
And if I go back to that same example with my understanding of the way Don puts it, jumping in front of a bus, right? Pushing no one but myself and launching myself forward, according to that definition, would also be that evil act, right? Right, doing evil to myself, and that's, I see harm is different than evil, but like, I'm not going to fight you on it. We've already did that, so.
Right.
But that's just how I disagree. I did, and I still do.
With me.
Yeah. I'm not. I have no intention on changing anybody's mind about that. I think there's a lot of gray, and I don't think what I am saying is absolute. Your example is a great case in point. If someone is jumping in front of a bus and to cause themselves harm gleefully, is that evil? I don't know. I probably not. But slowly killing yourself over time might be a thing that you want to examine. Anyway, I think we can move on from that. It's just the thing that we're entertaining the thought of evil, and we definitely agree that there is, a suffering, there is a intentional harm with malicious intent kind of thing. That seems to be common with different concepts. We've looked at a lot of different examples of that throughout time and history now. So
right.
I think that's safe. I mean, the whole point, we're not going to get to, I think, a definitive definition and one that we can base things off of. I think the whole goal here is just to really get a foundation of the concepts of evil that all of these different places and times, and cultures have had, and religions, because when they put forth their devil, we need to understand where that came from.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's valid. I'm really curious to see how many similarities we're going to see in the devils. I think I'm really interested in that, based on the fact that evil has its different definitions in different cultures. Though fairly common, it's about suffering and causing harm to others. So I'm that's one of the things I'm curious about. I'm really looking forward to kind of making those comparisons.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There is one point of clarification that I thought about on something I said around unintentional evil. And what we were talking about in unintentional evil, which kind of goes against what we were just talking about, is what I was referring to there is the participating in a structure that causes evil that you don't necessarily have a lot of choice over the matter, or you're not necessarily conscious of, but the whole system can cause oppression, can cause evil to others. I made the example of, the cell phone that you buy, or the computer, and you know where you get all those parts. And but the one thing that I did bring up is I said something about being unintentionally evil, or different ways to be doing unintentional evil, and I said being white. And I want to clarify on that I don't mean being white is evil. What I do mean is that the privilege that comes with that package causes evil, or can cause evil. So I just wanted to clarify that. I don't think we're evil as white people.
There's a lot of capacity for it, though. Like, in general, there's a lot of capacity, but like, I immediately go to the absolute power corrupts absolutely. And white people have grasped power for so long that there's a lot of reasons to say evil is there, but I get what you're saying. It's not all. It's not a racial feature.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We just happen to be at the top for a while and not really care what effect that has on others. So it's good to at least recognize that that's a thing, that's a structure. I don't like it. I don't like that I participate in it. We do what we can.
Yeah.
And I think, when we talked a lot about the different ways to explain evil, and that came through the theodicy not the Odysseys, but theodicy. And those were the different ways to explain evil. And those came in theology. So just, again, discussing things in rational terms, trying to explain the phenomena that you see in intellectual thought, to try and grasp the understandings that you get. And then the other way would be mythology. So we're telling stories that illustrate and provide sort of on an unconscious basis sometimes, where the feeling is of that community and people of, the origins of evil and stuff. And it's through theodicy that we get the devil. Without theodicy, we don't get the devil at all, because you have to have some way to explain why there is evil.
Right.
And that's the reason the devil surfaces in the first place. So,
right. But remember, we went through the different gods, right? So there was the one god versus the multi-gods, and like, if one god is always benevolent, always kind, then he cannot also have the evil, creating the other reason to explain.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of tees up what we're going to talk about in the next episode. I think I'm going to call it The Face of Evil. But the questions that I'm thinking about right now that we're going to try and hit are, what is the devil? What does the personification of evil mean? And how is the devil understood in different religions today? And we're not going to cover everyone, but we'll give some examples just to try to get some idea of where we are in modern understandings.
Definitely.
Thank you all for listening. Once again, you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Devil Podcast, Twitter at The Devil Podcast, Instagram, The Devil Podcast, YouTube, just look up The Devil You Don't Know, and Patreon is patreon.com/The Devil Podcast. The show notes are in the description, and there's a link tree in there as well, so you can find all the information that you want for everything that we talked about here. You can subscribe. Please leave a review. Tell us what you think. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. And now we're going to do some Patreon shout-outs.
Awesome.
These are the folks who have helped us make this happen. So big, huge thank yous to Merck, Seven Realms Productions, Hugo Hernandez, Jeremy Ritchie, Jay Halamek, KVH, Tech Rogue, Brad McGowan, Frederick Fiquet, Fiquet. I'm still going to get that wrong. Frederick, we need to talk.
We are so sorry.
But we still love you, Frederick.
Yeah.
Whatever your name is.
Gordon Duke, Jason Kittredge, Jenna McMichael, Nathan Rockwood, Rob McLennan, and Vorel. Lastly, I want to give a huge, big thank you to Jasmine Brand at Dark Nostalgia Works. Jasmine has been the sort of my go-to, my Obi-Wan Kenobi, putting this episode together and teaching me the podcasting ropes. She has a true crime podcast called Killing Nostalgia, and I highly recommend you guys all check that out. It's super cool. She knows her stuff. So thank you all, and join us next time for more of The Devil You Don't Know.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.